That Friday started the way bad Fridays usually do. Quietly, and with something small going wrong, before I even left the apartment. My gym bag zipper broke. Not completely, just enough that it wouldn't close all the way, so I had to carry it with one hand, pressed against the side, like I was holding a wound shut. I almost went back inside. But I had skipped Monday and Wednesday already, and there's a version of yourself you're trying not to become, so I went. Ridgeline Fitness was my place. Not the nicest gym in Portland. Not the cheapest either. It had good equipment, decent lighting, and the kind of regulars who kept to themselves, which was exactly what I wanted at 6:30 in the morning. I had been going for 2 years. I knew which treadmills drifted left, which locker stuck, and approximately when the hot water ran out in the showers. What I didn't know was that the main entrance had a burst pipe overnight, and the whole front section was blocked off with yellow tape and a handwritten sign on yellow paper that said, "Use north door." Arrow pointing left. The north door opened into a section of the gym I had never actually used. Spin bikes mostly, a row of kettlebells, and a small open stretching area near the windows that looked out onto the parking lot. I dropped my bag near a bench, pulled out my headphones, and found a stretch of open floor. Then I noticed her. She was already there, standing at the edge of the mat with a foam roller under one foot, looking down at her phone with the kind of focused stillness that made the rest of the room feel unimportant. Dark hair, practical ponytail, gray long-sleeve shirt that looked like she had owned it for years. She was not performing being there, she was just there. She glanced up before I looked away. I had been standing still for probably 2 seconds longer than normal, which I realized too late. She didn't make a face about it. She just looked back at her phone. I did my warm-up. I kept my eyes off her, which took more effort than it should have. Halfway through my second set of lunges, I dropped my water bottle, and it rolled about 4 feet across the floor and stopped exactly beside her left shoe. She looked at the bottle, then at me. "Sorry," I said, walking over. She stepped back to let me pick it up. "It happens." Occupational hazard of people who can't close their gym bags properly. She looked at my bag, zipper open, things barely contained. "What happened to it?" "Gave out this morning." "I don't know. It just decided today was the day." She considered that. "Solidarity," she said, and held up her own water bottle. There was a crack running up the side, sealed with what looked like athletic tape. "Mine's been on life support since March." I laughed. She almost did. That was the whole conversation. She went back to her workout. I went back to mine, but something about the two broken things felt like a small, strange acknowledgement. Like the morning had introduced us whether we agreed to it or not. She left before I finished. I didn't see which way she went. The front entrance was fixed by the following Monday, but I used the north door anyway. I told myself it was because the parking on that side was easier. That wasn't exactly true. She wasn't there Monday. She wasn't there Wednesday. By Friday I had stopped pretending I wasn't looking, which was its own embarrassing admission. I finished my workout and drove home, and thought about how I didn't even know her name. Only that she had a broken water bottle held together with athletic tape, and a way of standing that made it seem like she had already figured out something I hadn't. The next Friday, I almost skipped. I had a project review that afternoon, and a low-grade headache that had been following me since Tuesday, and the version of me that wanted to stay in bed almost won. But I went. I told myself it was discipline. She was there. Same stretch of mat by the window, same gray shirt or one exactly like it. She was doing single-leg deadlifts with a dumbbell, slow and controlled, like she had done them so many times she didn't need to think about them. I sat up nearby. Not next to her. Just nearby. She noticed when I came in. I know because she was facing the window, and I saw the slight adjustment of her posture, the way people shift when they register someone entering a space without deciding to register it. I finished a set and said, without looking over, Tape still holding? A pause. Then, so far. Impressive engineering. I used to work with structural engineers, she said. Something rubbed off. I looked over then. She was still facing the window, mid-movement. What do you do now? Urban planning. Same general idea. Things either hold up or they don't. That's a lot of pressure. She set the dumbbell down and picked up her water bottle. Less than you'd think. Most things that fall apart give you warning. You just have to pay attention. I didn't know what to say to that, so I nodded like it was practical advice about gym equipment and went back to my workout. But I was thinking about it 20 minutes later in the parking lot, and again that night when I was eating dinner alone at my kitchen counter. Her name was Sloane. I found that out the following week when the woman at the front desk called across the room to ask if she had lost a keycard. She said yes, came to collect it, and I heard the desk woman say, "Here you go, Sloane." In that way, front desk people do when they know you well enough to be casual. Sloane. It fit her the way a good last name sometimes fits a first one. After that morning, things moved the way things move when neither person admits they are moving anywhere. She was almost always there first. I would arrive, and she would be on the mat or near the kettlebells. And we would end up close enough to talk without it requiring effort from either of us. Conversations happened in small pieces. A comment about the playlist someone had connected to the speaker system. A question about form on a movement she was doing that I hadn't seen before. The discovery that we both refused to use the foam roller on our IT bands because it was too painful to be worth it, which she said was a character flaw, and I said was a rational risk assessment. One morning she showed up 15 minutes late, which for her was late, and I noticed. I didn't say anything because I had no right to notice. But she caught me looking when she walked in and said, without breaking stride, "Transit delay. Don't start." I wasn't going to say anything. "You had a face." "I don't have a face." She dropped her bag near the mat. "You definitely have a face." I did not ask what kind of face. I thought about it for the rest of the workout. At some point, without either of us scheduling it, we started leaving around the same time. Not together exactly. More like finishing within the same 10 minutes, and then happening to be near the exit simultaneously. She would say something brief, I would say something back, and then she would walk to her car, and I would walk to mine. It was so far from a plan that I convinced myself it meant nothing. Then one Thursday I mentioned I had to skip Friday because of an early meeting, and she said, "So you won't be here tomorrow," with a flatness that I spent too much time trying to read later. Not disappointed exactly. More like she had noted a fact she wasn't sure what to do with. "I'll be back Monday," I said. "Okay," she said. That weekend I replayed it probably 4 times. I was 31 years old, a project manager at an architecture firm, a person who could give a 45-minute presentation to a room full of clients without once losing the thread. And I was sitting in my apartment on a Saturday night, trying to decode one word from a woman I had spoken to, a combined total of maybe 30 minutes. Monday she was there, and things were the same, and I felt both relieved and ridiculous about being relieved. It was a Tuesday, about 6 weeks in, when I finally asked her to get coffee. I had thought about how to do it. I had actually planned it, which was not something I normally did. Usually I was direct. With Sloane, I kept second-guessing what direct looked like, because she was hard to read, and I had been wrong about her expression before, and I didn't want to get it wrong. What I actually said was, "There's a place on Burnside that just opened. They do single-origin pour-overs. I was going to check it out this week. You want to come?" She was retaping her water bottle. New crack, different section. She didn't look up right away. "Which day?" she asked. "Thursday, after work around 6. She finished with the tape, pressed down the edge carefully, then looked at me. "Okay." No additional words. Just okay, which from Sloane felt like more than it would have from anyone else. The coffee place was called Still Water. It was small, 8 tables, exposed brick, quiet in a way that felt intentional rather than empty. She was already there when I arrived. She had taken a small table near the back wall, not the window. I noticed that because it was a choice, and choices told you things about people. We were there for 2 hours. I only know because the barista eventually turned on softer music, which meant they were winding down for the evening, and I looked up and realized the light had changed. She ordered a cortado. I ordered a pour-over I hadn't heard of, and the barista walked me through where the beans were from, which took 4 minutes. And Sloane watched the whole thing with the neutral expression she kept for things she found more interesting than she let on. She told me about the project she was working on, a transit corridor redesign in the northeast part of the city, 6 months of stakeholder meetings, 2 competing proposals, a city council vote coming up that she was not optimistic about. "What makes you think it won't pass?" I asked, because the version that would actually work is the one that requires the most inconvenience short term. And people vote against inconvenience, even when they understand the long-term math. That's a bleak way to think about it. It's an accurate way to think about it, she said. I'm not bleak, I'm just calibrated. I asked her about the structural engineers she'd mentioned before. The comment she made about her old job. She told me she had started in civil engineering, realized what she actually cared about was the intersection of infrastructure and communities, rather than the engineering side, specifically, went back to school and redirected. Most people thought that was a strange move, she said. What did you think? She wrapped both hands around her cortado. I thought if I kept doing the thing that made more obvious sense, I'd be good at something I didn't actually care about. And that seemed like a waste. I didn't tell her that I had been thinking about something similar for about 8 months, that I was good at managing projects, well-regarded, recently promoted, and had been waking up at 2 in the morning with a low feeling I couldn't name. Instead I said, "So you just changed course." "Eventually," she said. It took a while to stop waiting for a cleaner moment. We walked out at the same time. The night was cold but not raining, which in Portland in October felt like a gift. She had parked on a different block than me. "Thanks for the coffee recommendation," she said. "Thanks for testing it with me." She smiled then, briefly but actually, and said, "Same time next week?" I said yes before I processed what next week meant. She nodded once and walked toward her car. For the next few weeks, Thursday evenings at Stillwater became a thing. Not an official thing. We never named it. But it happened, and we both knew it would happen, and that felt like its own kind of definition. She remembered small things I mentioned. A difficult client I was managing. A difficult that was making the weeks feel compressed. She asked about them later. Without prompting, I noticed she drank her coffee the same way every time, and that she always arrived first, and always chose the same table or one very like it. I noticed she became less guarded. The longer an evening went on, like she had a careful budget for openness, and she would spend it slowly if she decided you were worth it. I was starting to feel like I might be worth it. In November, I asked if she wanted to come to a work event with me. My firm was hosting a small showcase of a building project that had just finished construction. Drinks, architects talking too long, some decent food. "It won't be riveting," I told her, "but the building is actually interesting." She said yes in the same clean way. She always said yes, with no unnecessary enthusiasm, but no hesitation either. She wore a dark green blazer and black pants, and looked so composed, standing in a room full of people in suits, that 2 of my colleagues later asked, independently, who she was. I introduced her as a friend, which felt true, and also insufficient, in a way I didn't examine right then. She was good with people. Not warm exactly, but precise. She asked questions that were exactly the right questions, and people found themselves explaining things they hadn't expected to explain. My project director, a man named Graham, who had been in the industry for 30 years and was deeply hard to impress. Talked to her for 20 minutes about zoning law and said afterward that she had a good head. Coming from Graham, that was almost excessive praise. At the end of the evening, we ended up near the back windows, the city lights laid out below us. The room had thinned out. I said her name, just Sloane, as a way of starting a sentence I hadn't fully formed, and she looked at me with that steady, unreadable attention of hers. Whatever I had planned to say dissolved. She said, "We should go, I'll walk out with you." In the elevator she was quiet. Outside the air was cold and she pulled her coat tighter. I walked her to her car because it seemed right. She unlocked it and turned back toward me. "Thanks for bringing me," she said. "You were the most interesting person in the room." She looked at me for a moment. "That's a low bar at an architecture showcase." "No, it isn't," I said. She held my gaze just a moment longer than she needed to, then said, "Good night," and got in her car. I stood in the parking garage for a few seconds after she drove out. Then I walked to my own car and spent the drive home, trying to figure out what she had looked like in that last second, and whether I was reading it right. Thursday the following week, she was already at our table when I got to Stillwater, cortado in front of her, both hands around it, looking at the window. She turned when I sat down. "I have to tell you something," she said. The way she said it made me stop moving. "Okay," I said. She looked at the table for a second, then back up. "I've been trying to figure out when to say this, and I don't have a good answer for when, so I'm going to say it now and let you do what you want with it." I waited. "I knew who you were before we talked at the gym," she said. The room went a little quiet in my head. "What does that mean?" "My firm was in the early stages of a potential collaboration with yours. It wasn't finalized, nothing formal, but there was a short list of project managers at your firm who'd been mentioned. You were on it. I looked up some of your work, public stuff, a project write-up you'd contributed to, a panel you were on at a conference." She paused. "I also saw a post from your gym's Instagram about a new class schedule or something. I recognized the location." I looked at her. "I didn't engineer it," she said carefully. "I wasn't standing at that mat waiting for you. But I had seen your face before. And when you dropped your water bottle, I knew who you were, and I still pretended I didn't." The table between us felt suddenly more literal. "The tape," I said. "What?" "You held up your water bottle. With the tape. You made it into a connection point." She didn't flinch. "Yes." I sat back, tried to locate what I was feeling. The gym, all those mornings, every small exchange I had thought was random. They had a different architecture now. A frame I hadn't known about. "So you chose to talk to me," I said. "I chose not to correct the situation," she said, "which I know isn't a clean distinction." "It isn't." She nodded. She wasn't defending it, I noticed that. She wasn't offering me a version that made it smaller than it was. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. "Because you said something 2 weeks ago about how you'd rather know something uncomfortable than keep building on something that wasn't level." She looked directly at me. I remembered it. I did remember saying that. We had been talking about a renovation project I was managing, a structural issue that had been papered over for years. I had been talking about architecture. She had filed it under something else. I didn't know how to respond, so I looked at my coffee and thought about the first Friday. The north door, the yellow tape, her standing at the edge of the mat like she belonged there. The dropped water bottle rolling exactly to her foot, right in the comments. "When you found out, the whole thing had a different beginning. Would you have walked away? Or does what comes after get to count for something?" I thought about Stillwater. Every Thursday, the way she had said same time next week like it was just a practical suggestion, and not the thing I kept thinking about afterward. The way she had told 2 of my colleagues at that showcase, without being asked, something specific about a project they were struggling with that turned out to be exactly right. The way she listened, Not to collect information, I was sure of that now, but because she was actually interested in where things were going. I looked at her. The collaboration. Did it happen? With our firms? No, it didn't go forward. So there's no professional angle. There hasn't been one for months. I turned my cup in my hands. You could have never said anything. Yes, I would have had no idea. I know, she said. So why? Because you would have kept building on something that wasn't level, she said quietly. And you told me that mattered to you. I sat with that. For a while. The coffee shop was filling up, people settling in for the evening, small conversations around us that had nothing to do with ours. Sloane sat still and let me think. Finally I said, I'm going to need a couple of days. Okay, she said. No push, no argument. She picked up her cortado and took a careful sip. That's fair. We walked out together but separated without ceremony. She went left, I went right. I sat in my car for a few minutes before I started it. The drive home felt like the city was at a slight angle. Not wrong exactly. Just tilted in a way I needed to account for. For 2 days I did the things I normally did. I went to work. I reviewed drawings. I sat through a check-in with my director, where he asked for my read on a contractor dispute. And I gave him a clear answer that he seemed satisfied with. And I thought about almost nothing I was supposed to be thinking about. At lunch I walked around the block twice before going back inside. Not because I needed the air, but because staying in my chair felt impossible. I kept returning to one thing, and it wasn't the part I expected. She hadn't had to tell me. That was the part I couldn't get out from under. The professional connection was gone months ago. I had no way of finding out. She could have kept Thursday evenings at Stillwater exactly the way they were, and I would have gone on, believing the north door and the broken water bottle, and all of it was just luck. Two slightly broken things meeting each other. I would have believed that indefinitely. Instead she had said, I don't have a good answer for when, and then told me anyway. I thought about what I actually knew about Sloane that wasn't about how we met. I knew she had changed direction in her career at a point when it would have been much easier not to. I knew she had spent months on a transit project she believed in, even though she thought it wouldn't pass, because the work itself mattered regardless. Fashion. I knew she kept a cracked water bottle, held together with tape until it gave up entirely, which she said was practical, and I thought was something else. I knew she arrived everywhere first and never made you feel like that was a statement. I knew she listened to people, like she was genuinely trying to figure out what they meant, not just what they were saying. And I knew she had told me the truth when it cost her something. On the third day, I texted her. Stillwater 6 o'clock? She replied in 11 minutes. Okay. When I walked in she was at the table. Same chair, same cortado, no laptop. She watched me come toward her. I sat down, took my coat off. Neither of us said anything for a moment. I kept thinking about the fact that you didn't have to tell me, I said. I know. You could have let it stay what it looked like. Yes, but you told me at the exact point where it might actually matter. When there was something real to lose. She looked at me steadily. I was aware of that. I'm not saying I'm fully past it, I said. The fact that you knew who I was when I was standing there, thinking I was just some guy who dropped his water bottle, that still sits funny. It's should, she said. I just need you to understand that it was real from your side too. Not a strategy, not a continued project. She set down her cup and said, with the same flatness she used when she was being most precise, you were not what I was expecting. I thought I was creating a professional introduction. And then you said your broken gym bag was just deciding that today was the day. And she stopped. I don't know. Something shifted. That was my line, I said. It wasn't a very good one. And yet, she looked at her hands. I closed my laptop when you sat next to me at Stillwater that first time. I don't usually do that. I remembered noticing. I hadn't told her I noticed. I want to keep going, I said. but I need it to actually be level. No managing the information. No deciding what I get to know. I know I mean it. I know you mean it, she said. And I want that too. Not because it's fair to you, though it is. Because I don't want to manage this. She looked up. I'm tired of managing things. From her, that was not a small thing to say. I reached across the table. Not dramatically, just to set my hand near hers. She looked down at it and then back at me, and the careful, measured expression she kept. Most of the time did something I hadn't seen before. It didn't disappear. It just softened, like something set down carefully after a long time. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. We ordered more coffee. The barista walked me through a new origin, which took 6 minutes this time. And Sloane watched the whole thing with that look she used. She was interested, and didn't feel like announcing it. When I got home later and sat down on the couch, I thought about the north door with the yellow tape, and the handwritten arrow pointing left. I had stood there for a half-second, mildly annoyed, and gone where it pointed. That was it. That was the whole thing. Except it turned out, she had also read the arrow, and neither of us had known that at the same time. It was still a strange beginning. But I'd stopped wanting a different one.